I thought the worst part about working the night shift at an abandoned hospital was the isolation, until I realized I wasn't alone, and the other staff had been dead for 20 years. My name is David Morrison, and I'm a 28-year-old security professional living in Cleveland, Ohio. What I'm about to tell you happened last fall, during what should have been a routine 6-month security contract at St. Mary's Hospital on the east side of the city. I took the job because the pay was exceptionally good, almost twice what I'd normally make for overnight security work, and I needed the money to help support my sick mother. The job posting had been straightforward: overnight security at a medical facility, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shifts, Monday through Friday. The description mentioned that it was a transitional period for the facility and that I'd be working mostly alone, which suited me fine. I'd worked plenty of overnight security jobs before: office buildings, warehouses, retail stores, and I was comfortable with solitude. My interview was conducted by a woman named Helen Morrison, no relation, despite the shared last name, who claimed to be the interim facility manager. She was probably in her 60s, well-dressed, and spoke with the kind of professional authority you'd expect from hospital administration. The interview took place in a small office building about 5 miles from the hospital itself. The position requires someone who can handle working alone for extended periods, Helen explained. St. Mary's is in the process of restructuring, and we need someone reliable to maintain security during the overnight hours when the building is mostly empty. She handed me a set of keys, a security badge, and a basic floor plan of the hospital. The building was large, 5 floors with multiple wings, and my duties would include regular patrols, monitoring entry points, and maintaining a log of any unusual incidents. The pay is $25 per hour, plus a night differential, Helen continued. We understand that working alone in a large building can be challenging, which is why we compensate appropriately. $25 an hour was more than I'd ever made doing security work. I didn't ask too many questions. My first night on the job was a Monday in late September. I arrived at St. Mary's Hospital at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, as I always prefer to be. The building was a massive brick structure that looked like it had been built in the 1940s or 50s, with that institutional architecture common to older hospitals. The parking lot was mostly empty, which I expected for a night shift. There were maybe a dozen cars scattered around, which Helen had mentioned belonged to essential overnight staff, nurses, doctors, and maintenance workers who kept the facility running during reduced hours. But as I walked toward the main entrance, something felt off about the building. Many of the windows were dark, which wasn't unusual, but there was a quality to the darkness that seemed heavy. And while I could see some lights on in various parts of the building, they had a dim, yellowish quality that suggested old lighting systems. The main entrance was a set of heavy glass doors with St. Mary's Hospital etched into the glass. I used my key card to enter, and immediately noticed that the lobby felt colder than it should have, even for September in Ohio. The lobby itself was dated but clean, lots of wood paneling and vinyl furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. There was a reception desk with a few chairs scattered around, and several hallways leading off in different directions. Everything was dimly lit by overhead fluorescents that hummed constantly. I found the security office on the first floor, just as Helen had described. It was a small room with a desk, a chair, a computer terminal, and a wall of monitors showing feeds from security cameras throughout the building. The monitors were old CRT models that flickered occasionally, but they seemed to work well enough. My first few hours passed normally. I did my initial walkthrough of the building, checking doors and noting which areas were active. The first floor had what appeared to be emergency services and administrative offices, most of which were dark and locked. The second floor housed various medical departments and patient rooms, about half of which showed signs of recent use. The third and fourth floors were mostly patient rooms and seemed largely inactive, with only occasional lights visible under doors. The fifth floor, according to my floor plan, contained the psychiatric ward and some specialized treatment areas, and appeared to be completely dark. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard the sounds. I was back in the security office, reviewing the camera feeds, when I heard what sounded like a cart being wheeled down one of the hallways on the second floor. This wasn't unusual. Hospitals operate 24/7, and staff moving equipment around at night is completely normal. But when I checked the camera feed for that area, I couldn't see anyone in the hallway. I switched between different camera views, trying to spot whoever was moving the cart. The sound was clearly audible, the familiar squeak of medical equipment wheels on linoleum flooring, but none of my cameras showed any staff members or equipment being moved. The sound stopped after about 30 seconds, and I chalked it up to the cameras having blind spots or maybe the audio coming from a different area than I thought. 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, the sound seemed to be coming from the third floor, the same rhythmic squeaking of wheels moving slowly down the hallway. Again, I checked the cameras and saw nothing. I decided to do a physical patrol to see if I could spot whoever was moving around up there. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the stairwell, making my way up to the third floor. The third floor was darker than the lower levels, with only emergency lighting providing minimal illumination. The hallway stretched out in both directions, lined with patient room doors that were all closed. The air up here felt heavier somehow, and there was a faint smell that reminded me of disinfectant mixed with something else I couldn't identify. I walked slowly down the main hallway, listening carefully for any sounds of movement. Everything was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the building's heating system. But as I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed something strange. Several of the patient room doors had lights on underneath them. Not bright lights, but the dim glow you'd expect from bedside lamps or television screens. This suggested that the rooms were occupied, but I hadn't seen any staff members, and Helen had mentioned that most patient areas would be empty during the restructuring. I knocked gently on one of the doors, showing light underneath. "Security check," I called out quietly. "Is everything okay in there?" What I heard in response made my blood run cold. It was the sound of someone, or something, moving around inside the room, followed by what sounded like labored breathing or whimpering. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. I knocked again, a bit louder this time. "Hello? This is building security. Do you need assistance?" The sound stopped immediately, as if whoever was inside had suddenly gone completely still. I spent the next 10 minutes trying different doors along the hallway. Most were locked, but several showed that dim light underneath, and a few responded to my knocking with similar sounds of movement or breathing from inside. This was clearly beyond my job description. Helen had said the building would be mostly empty, but there were obviously patients in these rooms who might need medical attention. I decided to return to the security office and call the number Helen had given me for emergencies. The phone rang several times before Helen answered, sounding groggy as if I'd woken her up. "Helen, this is David from St. Mary's Security. I'm sorry to call so late, but I think we have a situation here. There are patients in some of the third floor rooms, and I think some of them might need help." There was a long pause before Helen responded. "Patients? David, what exactly are you seeing?" "Well, I can hear people in the rooms, and there are lights on underneath several doors. Some of them sound distressed. Should I be calling medical staff, or do you want me to?" "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Helen interrupted. "The third floor patient rooms are not currently in use. They've been empty for over a month as part of the restructuring. If you're hearing sounds, it's probably just the building settling or maybe some maintenance equipment. But I can clearly hear people moving around in there, and someone was definitely breathing heavily in room 314. David, I understand that working alone in a large building can play tricks on your mind. These old hospitals make all kinds of sounds. Just focus on your regular patrol duties and try not to let your imagination run away with you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in the hallway with more questions than answers. I decided to trust Helen's explanation, at least for the moment. Maybe I was letting the unfamiliar environment get to me. I'd worked enough overnight security to know that empty buildings can produce strange sounds, and old hospitals were probably worse than most. I returned to the security office and tried to focus on routine tasks, checking doors, monitoring the cameras, and updating my incident log. For the next hour, Everything was quiet. Then, around 4 a.m., the elevator started moving by itself. I was reviewing camera feeds when I noticed that the elevator indicator lights were changing floors. First floor, then second, then third, then fourth, and finally fifth. The elevator stayed on the fifth floor for several minutes, then began descending back down. But according to my cameras, no one had called the elevator or gotten on at any floor. I watched the elevator indicator as it reached the first floor and the doors opened. The hallway camera showed the elevator interior clearly. It was completely empty. After about 30 seconds, the doors closed and the elevator returned to the second floor, where it stayed. This was getting beyond what I could rationalize as building settling or maintenance equipment. I decided to investigate the fifth floor, which according to my floor plan housed the psychiatric ward. The stairwell to the fifth floor felt different from the others, colder, and with an oppressive quality that made me want to turn back. When I reached the fifth floor landing, I found that the door was marked with several warning signs: authorized personnel only, restricted access, and psychiatric ward, secure area. Frightened, I used my master key to unlock the door and stepped into the fifth floor hallway. The difference was immediately apparent. While the lower floors had felt outdated but functional, the fifth floor felt abandoned. The lighting was dimmer, the air was staler, and there was a pervasive smell of decay that made me want to breathe through my mouth. But the most disturbing thing was the sounds. From various rooms along the hallway, I could hear voices, not loud voices, but the kind of murmured conversations you'd expect in a hospital ward. Some sounded like patients talking to themselves or calling for nurses. Others sounded like staff members having quiet discussions about treatments or medications. The sounds were clearly coming from inside the rooms, but when I looked under the doors, I could see that most of the rooms were completely dark inside. I approached one of the rooms where the voices seemed loudest, room 507. Inside, I could hear what sounded like a woman having a conversation with someone, though I could only hear one side of it. "Please, I don't want to take the medication anymore," the voice was saying. "It makes me feel so sleepy and I can't think clearly. Can't we try something else?" There was a pause, as if someone was responding. Then, "I know you think it's helping, but I feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm not myself anymore." I knocked gently on the door. "Excuse me, this is building security. Is everything all right in there?" The voice stopped immediately. After a moment, I heard footsteps approaching the door from inside. "Who's there?" the woman's voice asked, much closer to the door now. "This is David. I'm working security tonight. I heard you talking and wanted to make sure you were okay." "Security? But it's the middle of the night. Where are the nurses? The nurses should be around somewhere. Are you a patient here? Do you need me to call someone for you?" There was a long pause. Then, "I've been waiting for someone to check on me for so long. The nurses used to come by every few hours, but I haven't seen anyone in I don't remember how long it's been." This was clearly a patient who needed medical attention, possibly someone who had been forgotten during the restructuring Helen had mentioned. I tried my master key on the door, but it wouldn't turn. This room apparently required a different level of access. "I'm going to call for a nurse to come check on you," I told her through the door. "What's your name?" "Margaret," she replied. "Margaret Stevens. I'm in room 507, but I think there might be something wrong with my chart. The doctors keep asking me about things that don't make sense." "What kind of things?" "They keep asking me about events from years ago, like they just happened. And they mention people who I know died a long time ago. I think there might be some confusion about my records." I promised Margaret that I'd find someone to help her and moved on to check other rooms. But as I continued down the hallway, I encountered similar situations in almost every room that had voices coming from it. Room 509 had an elderly man who claimed he'd been waiting for his son to visit, but said the nurses told him his son was still fighting in Vietnam. Room 511 had a woman who insisted it was 1987, and that she needed to call her job to tell them she'd be late for work. Room 5115 had someone who spoke only in whispers, claiming that they were listening to everything and that the medication was actually poison. Each patient I spoke with seemed confused about what year it was, mentioned people or events from decades ago as if they were recent, and claimed they hadn't seen medical staff in an impossibly long time, and all of them sounded completely real, not like recordings or hallucinations, but like actual people having actual conversations through the doors. I returned to the security office and tried calling Helen again, but this time the number went straight to voicemail. I left a detailed message explaining what I'd found on the 5th floor and asking for immediate guidance on how to handle what appeared to be multiple patients in need of medical attention. Then I tried calling 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is David Morrison calling from St. Mary's Hospital on East 14th Street. I'm working security here, and I've found multiple patients on the 5th floor who appear to have been without medical care for an extended period. I think we need paramedics and possibly social services. There was a pause before the dispatcher responded. Sir, did you say St. Mary's Hospital on East 14th Street? Yes, that's correct. Sir, St. Mary's Hospital was permanently closed in 2003. The building has been abandoned for over 20 years. The phone nearly slipped out of my hands. That's impossible. I'm standing in the building right now. I was hired to work security here. There are patients upstairs who need help. Sir, I'm going to send a patrol car to check on your well-being. St. Mary's Hospital is a condemned building that's been empty since 2003. No one should be inside that building. Panicked, the call ended, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. I was clearly inside a functioning hospital. I'd been hired by Helen Morrison. I'd been given keys and security codes, and I'd been working here for hours. But as I looked around the security office with fresh eyes, I began to notice things that should have been obvious before. A computer terminal on the desk was an old CRT monitor from the 1990s, not the modern LCD screens you'd expect in a current facility. The security cameras were equally outdated, models that hadn't been manufactured in over a decade. The furniture, the decorations, even the style of the light switches were all from a much earlier era. And now that I was paying attention, the air in the building had a stale, abandoned quality that I'd been attributing to poor ventilation. Frightened, I grabbed my flashlight and ran back upstairs to the 5th floor. But this time I approached it differently. Instead of listening for voices from inside the rooms, I forced myself to look objectively at my surroundings. The hallway was covered in a thin layer of dust. The floor tiles were cracked and stained, and several ceiling panels were missing or sagging. The authorized personnel-only signs on the door were faded and peeling, suggesting they'd been there for years. But I could still hear the voices coming from the rooms. I tried the door to room 507 again, where I'd spoken with Margaret Stevens. This time, instead of using my key, I examined the lock mechanism closely with my flashlight. The lock was rusted solid. Based on the condition of the metal and the accumulation of corrosion, it hadn't been opened in years, possibly decades. But Margaret's voice was still clearly audible from inside the room. Terrified, "Is that you again, David?" her voice called through the door. "Did you find a nurse? I'm feeling much worse now. I think something's wrong with me." I ran from room to room, checking each lock with my flashlight. Every single door on the 5th floor was rusted shut, with locks that clearly hadn't been opened in decades. Some doors had chains and padlocks that were green with corrosion, but the voices continued from inside the rooms, patients calling for help, asking about medication, wondering why no one had checked on them. I fled back to the security office and grabbed my car keys. Whatever was happening here was beyond my ability to handle or understand. I needed to get out of the building immediately. As I headed for the main entrance, I heard footsteps behind me in the lobby. "David?" a woman's voice called. "David, where are you going?" I turned around and saw a figure in a nurse's uniform standing near the reception desk. She appeared to be in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of practical appearance you'd expect from an experienced hospital nurse. "Are you the security guard Helen told us about?" she asked. "We've been having some problems on the 5th floor. Several patients are asking for you specifically." "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I'm Nurse Patterson. I work the night shift in psychiatric." Didn't Helen explain our staffing situation? But as she stepped closer, I could see that something was wrong with her appearance. Her uniform, while clean and pressed, was clearly from an earlier era. The style and cut were from the 1980s or early 90s, and there was something about her face that seemed not quite right, not obviously wrong, but subtly off in a way that made me want to back away. "I need to leave," I said, backing toward the entrance. "There's been some kind of mistake. David, you can't leave now. We need you here. The patients are counting on you, and Helen specifically requested that you work the full shift." Helen lied to me. This hospital has been closed for 20 years. Nurse Patterson tilted her head as if I'd said something that didn't make sense. "Closed? David, that's ridiculous. We're clearly operational. You've been working here all night. You've spoken with patients. You've seen the facility in use." She was right, in a way. I had been working here all night. I had spoken with patients, but none of it made sense if the building had really been abandoned since 2003. "What year do you think it is?" I asked her. "It's 1987, of course. October 15th, 1987. I ran for the entrance, but the doors wouldn't open. My keycard wouldn't work, and the doors seemed to be locked from the outside. I pounded on the glass and shouted for help, but the parking lot outside was now completely empty. Even the scattered cars I'd seen when I arrived were gone." "David, please calm down," Nurse Patterson said from behind me. "You're frightening the patients. They can hear you shouting, and several of them are becoming agitated." I turned around, and now there were more staff members in the lobby. A man in a white coat who appeared to be a doctor, 2 additional nurses, and what looked like an orderly. All of them were dressed in styles from the 1980s, and all of them had that same subtle wrongness to their appearance. "Mr. Morrison," the doctor said, "I'm Dr. Williams, the chief of psychiatry. I think you may be having some kind of breakdown. These delusions about the hospital being closed are clearly a sign of acute stress reaction. Frightened." "You're not real," I said. "None of this is real. This building has been empty for decades." "David," Dr. Williams continued, "I want you to think carefully about what you're saying. You applied for a job here. You were hired. You've been working here all night. You've spoken with patients and staff. Does it really make sense that all of this would be a hallucination?" He had a point. Everything I'd experienced felt completely real. The conversations, the sounds, the physical sensations, none of it felt like a dream or hallucination. But I knew, somehow, that St. Mary's Hospital had been closed since 2003. "I want to show you something," Dr. Williams said, pulling out what appeared to be an employee file. "This is your application for employment, filled out in your handwriting and dated last month." He handed me the file, and I recognized my own handwriting on the forms, but the date on the application was October 1987, not 2023. "This is impossible," I whispered. "What's impossible, David, is the alternative explanation you're proposing, that you've somehow traveled back in time, or that you're interacting with ghosts, or that this entire night has been some kind of elaborate hallucination. Isn't it more likely that you're simply confused about some details?" I looked around the lobby, trying to find something that would prove definitively what year it was, but everything I saw could have been from 1987 or 2023. The basic architecture and furnishings were timeless institutional design that hadn't changed much over the decades. The only way to resolve this was to get outside and check the date on my phone, or find a calendar, or see modern cars in the parking lot, but the doors still wouldn't open. "The doors are locked for security reasons during night shifts," Nurse Patterson explained. "But Dr. Williams can unlock them if you really need to step outside for some fresh air." Dr. Williams produced a key and unlocked the entrance doors. "Just step outside for a moment, David. Clear your head, and then we can discuss this rationally." I walked outside into the cool October air and immediately pulled out my phone to check the date. The screen showed October 15th, 1987. But that was impossible. My phone was a modern smartphone that hadn't been invented in 1987. I looked at it more closely, and while it still looked like my phone, the interface was different, simpler, with fewer apps and a design that seemed more appropriate to the 1980s. I looked around the parking lot, and now there were cars again, but they were all models from the 1980s, boxy sedans and station wagons in colors and styles that matched the era. I ran to where I thought I'd parked my car, But instead of my 2019 Honda Civic, there was a 1985 Ford Escort in the exact same parking spot. When I tried my car key in the door, it opened. The interior was completely different from my actual car, but somehow it felt familiar, as if I'd been driving this car for years. There were personal items in the glove compartment that I recognized as mine, but which belonged to a version of my life I'd never lived. I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot, desperate to find something that would prove what year it actually was. But as I drove through the city, everything I saw matched 1987, the architecture, the cars on the road, even the styles of the street signs and businesses. I stopped at an all-night diner and bought a newspaper. The date was October 15, 1987, and the headlines were about events I remembered from history books, political stories and cultural references that belonged to the 1980s. But the most disturbing thing was that I remembered living through these events the first time. As I read the newspaper, I had clear memories of watching these news stories unfold on television, even though I knew I hadn't been born until 1995. I drove back to St. Mary's Hospital, where Dr. Williams was waiting for me in the parking lot. "Feel better?" he asked. "Sometimes a little fresh air can help clear up confusion." "This isn't real," I insisted. "Something is very wrong here. David, I want you to consider the possibility that you're experiencing a psychological episode brought on by the stress of working in a psychiatric hospital. It's not uncommon for staff members to develop anxiety or paranoid thoughts when they're constantly exposed to patients with mental health issues. But the patients on the 5th floor are receiving appropriate care from our qualified staff. You're not responsible for their treatment. That's what the medical professionals are for." Dr. Williams walked with me back into the hospital, and I found myself following him almost automatically. Part of me knew that this was all wrong, but another part of me was starting to doubt my own perceptions. What if I really was having some kind of breakdown? What if the stress of my mother's illness and my financial problems had caused me to develop paranoid delusions? Dr. Williams led me to a small office on the 2nd floor and invited me to sit down. "I want to help you work through this confusion," he said kindly. "But first, I need you to understand that St. Mary's Hospital is a fully operational medical facility and has been continuously operating since it was founded in 19... We have never been closed or abandoned." He showed me hospital records going back decades, staff directories that included my name, and patient files that documented continuous operation through the 1990s, 2000s, and into the present day. Sometimes when people are under stress, they can develop false memories or confabulate experiences that didn't actually happen, Dr. Williams explained. The mind can be very creative in constructing explanations for anxiety or fear. I spent the rest of my shift in Dr. Williams' office, discussing my confusion and learning about the hospital's actual history and operations. By morning, I was beginning to accept that I had indeed experienced some kind of stress-related episode. When my relief arrived at 7 a.m., a security guard named Mike, who greeted me like an old friend and mentioned that we'd worked together for several months, I felt embarrassed about my panic during the night. Helen Morrison arrived shortly after to check on me, expressing concern about the phone calls I'd made during the night. "I'm sorry about calling 911, I told her. "I think I got confused and panicked." "It happens, David. Working nights in a hospital can be stressful, especially when you're dealing with psychiatric patients. The important thing is that you're feeling better now." She offered me the rest of the week off to recover from my episode, but I insisted that I was fine and wanted to continue working. The job paid well, and I needed the income. For the next several weeks, my shifts at St. Mary's Hospital continued normally. I did my patrols, monitored the security cameras, and occasionally interacted with the night staff, doctors, nurses, and other hospital employees who all seemed to know me well and treated me as a longtime colleague. The patients on the 5th floor still called out occasionally, but now I understood that this was normal behavior for psychiatric patients and that the medical staff was handling their care appropriately. I no longer tried to unlock their doors or interfere with their treatment. Everything seemed perfectly normal and rational, but sometimes, late in my shift, I would find myself thinking about that first night and the terror I'd felt when I believed the hospital had been closed since 2003. The memory of that fear was still vivid, even though I now understood it had been a delusion. And sometimes, when I looked at my reflection in the hospital's windows or mirrors, I would notice that my face seemed slightly different than I remembered. Not obviously changed, but subtly altered in ways that made me look like I'd been working at St. Mary's for much longer than a few months. The most disturbing moments came when I would try to remember my life before taking this job. Those memories seemed increasingly vague and distant, as if they belonged to someone else or had happened in a dream. I knew I had taken the job to help support my sick mother, but when I tried to call her, the number I dialed connected me to a woman who claimed to have died in 1987 and spoke to me as if I were her son who had been working at the hospital for decades. 3 months into the job, I tried to leave. I simply didn't show up for my shift one Monday night, intending to find a different job and get some distance from what I was starting to understand was an unhealthy situation. But Tuesday morning, I woke up in the security office at St. Mary's Hospital with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Mike, the day security guard, greeted me normally and mentioned that I'd seemed tired during the shift change. Panicked, when I tried to drive away from the hospital, I found myself taking wrong turns that somehow always led back to the parking lot. When I tried to call other employers about different jobs, the phone numbers connected me to staff members at St. Mary's. I began to understand that I wasn't just working at St. Mary's Hospital. I was part of it, in the same way that the patients on the 5th floor were part of it, and the doctors and nurses were part of it. We were all part of something that existed outside of normal time, in a version of 1987 that continued indefinitely, with the same staff caring for the same patients in an endless cycle of night shifts and day shifts. I'm still working at St. Mary's Hospital. According to the calendar in the security office, it's been October 15, 1987 for the past 8 months, though I'm not sure that measurement of time has any meaning here. The patients on the 5th floor still call for help, and I've learned their names and their stories. Margaret Stevens in room 507 has been waiting for her daughter to visit since 1987. The man in room 509 is still waiting to hear from his son in Vietnam. The woman in room 511 is still worried about being late for work. They're not getting better, but they're not getting worse either. They exist in a state of perpetual need, always just about to receive care that never quite comes. And I've realized that this might be what happens to people who take jobs at places like St. Mary's. Not the real St. Mary's Hospital that closed in 2003, but this version of it that exists for people who need to work night shifts in 1987. Sometimes I wonder if there are other versions of reality where other people are working security at other hospitals that may or may not actually exist. And I wonder if they eventually realize, as I have, that they're not just working at these places, they're feeding them. Because that's what I think St. Mary's needs, people like me to work the night shifts, to walk the halls, to interact with the patients and staff, to keep the whole system operating even though it doesn't actually accomplish anything. I'm writing this during my break in the security office, though I'm not sure how or where it will be read. Maybe by someone else who's considering a security job at a hospital that pays unusually well for overnight work. If you're reading this and someone offers you a job like that, I want you to ask yourself, why does a medical facility need a security guard who works completely alone? Why is the pay so much higher than comparable jobs? And why can't you find any recent information about the hospital online? Because you might not be taking a job at a real hospital. You might be taking a job at a place like St. Mary's, which needs people to keep it running even though it stopped being real a long time ago. Helen Morrison is calling for me on the radio. She says there's been an incident on the 3rd floor and that I need to investigate immediately. But I know that if I respond to that call, I'll be walking deeper into whatever St. Mary's Hospital actually is. Each time I respond to these requests, each time I do my job the way they expect me to, I become more integrated into this place and less connected to whatever reality I came from. The radio crackles again. David, we really need you up here. Room 314, the same room where you first heard someone breathing heavily all those months ago. I know I should ignore the call, I know I should try to break free from this cycle, but the truth is, I'm not sure I want to anymore, because the alternative is to accept that I might actually be having a complete psychotic break, that I might be a patient in some other hospital, that all of this, the job, the building, the other staff members, might be elaborate delusions created by my own deteriorating mind. And if that's the case, then at least at St. Mary's, I have a purpose. I have colleagues who treat me with respect. I have patients who depend on me, even if I can't actually help them. Is it better to be a security guard in an impossible hospital, or to be a mental patient who believes he's a security guard in an impossible hospital? I honestly don't know anymore. The radio crackles a third time. David, the patient in 314 is asking for you specifically. She says you're the only one who understands what's happening to her.